The trees swayed like silent giants in the dense woods, their rustling leaves a faint murmur in the cool, damp air. A chill settled in, not from the approaching night, but from the sickening weight of what was happening. Officer Riley stood at the edge of the forest, every muscle taut with the weight of fear. The search for little Emma had stretched on for hours, longer than anyone dared to think. Her small, barefoot footprints had led deeper into the underbrush, lost to the darkness that was creeping in faster than they'd anticipated. It had started as an ordinary afternoon in the park, a day full of laughter and sunshine. But now, it felt as though the world itself was holding its breath. Her parents, frantic with worry, had long since stopped speaking, their faces tight with fear. Riley could feel their anxiety radiating like an invisible force. His canine partner Max, a loyal German shepherd with a nose sharp enough to cut through the thickest fog, was on high alert, his body tense as he waited for his next command. Every second felt like a year. Riley's heart thundered in his chest as he scanned the darkening woods, wishing for a miracle. Then, without warning, Max's ears pricked up. He bolted forward, his paws sending a spray of dirt and leaves into the air as he bounded through the forest. Riley's breath hitched. The forest was silent, too silent. It felt like everything was holding its breath. Max's bark broke the stillness, his voice echoing through the trees. "Stay close!" Riley barked as he followed Max into the thickening shadows. It was the sudden quiet that hit him first. The kind of silence that feels like the world has stopped, waiting. Riley scanned the woods again, trying to force his eyes to pierce through the growing darkness. Emma had been missing for hours, and the search was no closer to finding her than it had been when they'd first started. The air was thick with moisture, clinging to his uniform like a heavy coat. The crunch of boots on leaves was the only sound that broke the silence, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Max was by his side, the dog eyes scanning the tree line with laser focus. His ears flicked as a faint noise cut through the stillness. His nose twitched, and Riley felt a rush of hope. But it was quickly followed by the gnawing fear that this hope might be false, that this moment would be just another dead end. The forest seemed endless, and Riley couldn't shake the feeling that they were losing precious time. "Stay close, Max," Riley murmured, his voice rough with the weight of responsibility. "We'll find her." But the woods stretched on, mocking his words, the trees standing like silent sentinels, indifferent to the pain unfolding within them. He wiped his face, brushing away the cold sweat that beaded on his brow, the panic welling up again. Time was slipping through his fingers like water, and every moment felt like a lifetime. The parents were waiting at the base of the woods, their faces drawn and hollow from hours of dread, but Riley couldn't afford to think about them now. All that mattered was Emma. Where was she? Was she cold? Was she scared? The questions gnawed at him as the seconds ticked by too slowly. Max took another step forward, his body taut, his senses alive. And then a sound, a bark, sharp, urgent. Riley's heart skipped. "Max!" he called, running toward the sound. "Where are you?" Max's bark rang again, louder this time, as if he were calling to Riley himself. The dog's figure was barely visible against the darkening forest, but his movements were precise, cutting through the underbrush like a creature born of instinct and dedication. Riley followed, not stopping to breathe, not caring for anything but the desperate need to find her. Then, a snap, a sound like a twig breaking underfoot. Max stopped. Riley's pulse quickened as he looked ahead, his heart hammering. Max was sniffing at something on the ground, a faint scent in the air. He crouched down, peering into the thick undergrowth. There, just within reach, was a torn piece of fabric, a pink flowery shirt, unmistakably Emma's. His throat tightened. She was close, she had to be. The underbrush was thick, the trees pressing in on them like they had a secret to keep, the air humid and heavy. Riley's breath came in shallow gasps as he crouched beside Max, who had not moved a muscle, his nose still buried in the torn fabric. Riley reached down to touch it, his fingers trembling as he recognized the delicate stitching that only a child would wear. A part of him, some deep, unspoken part, wanted to pull the fabric back and find Emma, to end the search, to feel her small hands grip his and know that she was safe. But the logic of the forest, the cruel uncertainty of its shadows, held him back. "She's close, buddy," Riley murmured, his voice hoarse. His words seemed to vanish into the vastness of the woods, swallowed by the thickening air. He had learned, in all his years as an officer, that silence often more terrifying than noise. And now, the silence pressed in on him like a weight he couldn't shake. Max let out a low growl, the hairs along his spine bristling as if he sensed something Riley could not see. The dog moved forward again, pulling Riley along as if the dog's instinct was all that mattered. Riley followed, stepping over twisted roots, ducking under low, hanging branches, all the while aware of the growing darkness that crept beneath the trees, the shadows beginning to blend into one seamless void. Then Max stopped, his ears twitching as a scent hit the air, a faint, almost imperceptible trace of something familiar. Riley could feel the cold chill creeping up his spine, his chest tightening with fear. They were so close, he could feel it in his bones. But as Max sniffed deeper, Riley's gut twisted. This wasn't just a search anymore. This wasn't about simply finding Emma. It was about saving her before time ran out. Riley's eyes scanned the area again. The trees were densely packed now, the path ahead almost invisible. His feet felt heavier, like they were sinking into the earth with every step, the weight of the search pressing down on him. But there was a flicker of hope in his chest now. Max was still leading, still pushing forward. That's when it happened. Max barked a sharp, desperate sound that echoed off the trees like a gunshot in the stillness. Riley's heart stuttered in his chest as he sprinted forward, pushing through the thick brush, branches whipping at his face. And then he saw her. Emma. She was clinging to a tree, her face pale and tear-streaked, her tiny frame shivering under the weight of the cold night. Riley's breath hitched, a surge of emotion flooding through him. She was alive, but barely. He ran to her, his legs moving on instinct, his hands shaking as he reached out to her. "Emma," he said, his voice cracking with relief and pain. "You're safe now." The child blinked at him, confusion clouding her tired eyes. She looked as if she might collapse any second, but when her gaze met his, something in her shifted. She held on tighter to the tree, her small fingers digging into the rough bark, her body trembling. Riley's heart broke at the sight. She was so small, so fragile. He repeated softly, crouching down to her level. He reached out, his hand steady despite the adrenaline that surged through him. "It's okay. I'm here. You're going to be okay." Max, ever the vigilant partner, sat by Emma's side, his tongue hanging out, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. The dog nudged Emma gently, licking her face with soft, comforting motions, as though he were assuring her, "You're safe now." Riley's arms ached as he carefully lifted Emma from the tree, cradling her small body close to his chest. The forest around them was silent once more, the only sound the steady pulse of his own heartbeat and the soft breath of Max beside him. The realization of what they had found, of how close they had come to losing her forever, hit him with a sudden force. He couldn't let her go. Not now, not when they had come so far. But the night had only just begun, and the journey back was not going to be any easier than the one to find her. Riley's mind raced as he took the first step away from the clearing, Max still by his side, walking ahead, guiding them. The forest seemed to close in around them, each shadow a reminder of how deep they were in the woods, how far from safety they remained. The sky above had turned a dark indigo, stars barely visible through the thick branches. The chill in the air was biting, and Emma's body trembled uncontrollably in his arms. "Stay with me, Emma," Riley whispered, more to himself than to her. His voice sounded hollow in the empty space between the trees. "We're almost there." But the journey back was slow. Emma's head rested against his shoulder, and her breathing was shallow, ragged. Riley pushed forward, trying to ignore the weariness that was beginning to settle in his own muscles. It was dark. The trees loomed taller now, shadows stretching like hands reaching for them. The silence felt louder now, filled with the weight of what they had yet to face. Max kept his pace steady, his ears flicking at every rustle of the trees. But Riley couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He couldn't explain it, but the air felt thick with tension, the woods around him too quiet. Emma's small body felt like it was growing heavier in his arms with every step, and Riley could feel her slipping further away, her body limp against his chest. "You're okay, Emma," Riley murmured, trying to soothe her, though the words felt empty now, hollow. The forest seemed to close in tighter with each passing second. Suddenly, the path ahead seemed darker, more foreboding, and Riley's mind raced. Then he realized it. They were lost. The panic surged, a tidal wave of fear that threatened to swallow him whole. His eyes darted around, but all he could see was the thick, unrelenting forest. He wasn't sure which way to go anymore. The compass inside him, the one that had always led him to the right path, had faltered, and now he felt like a man adrift. Max's ears twitched again, and the dog's low growl snapped Riley from his thoughts. In the distance he heard something, a sound too familiar, too close. He didn't dare hope, but when he turned, he saw the faint flash of headlights cutting through the trees. Rescue was near. The sound to the search party's voices grew louder as they approached, but Riley's body was already moving on its own. He pushed forward, his arms holding Emma tighter, his legs burning with exhaustion. Every part of him ached, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let her down. Not now. Max led them, his eyes shining in the growing light of the approaching rescue team. Riley's heart pounded in his chest. They were so close to safety. Emma's eyes fluttered, barely open now, her head drooping against him. "Hold on, Emma," Riley whispered. His voice cracked. The relief was coming too soon. Was she going to make it? Was she going to survive the night? His mind raced, his hands trembling as he called out, "We need help! Now!" The rescue team was on them in an instant, their faces grim but hopeful. They quickly assessed Emma's condition, taking her from Riley's arms and placing her on a stretcher. Riley's legs almost gave out, but Max stood firm by his side, his presence steady, grounding him. As the stretcher was carried away, Riley caught sight of Emma's parents. They ran to her, their tears flowing freely, and for the first time, Riley let himself breathe. He had done it. They had found her. Max sat next to Riley, his body relaxed, but his eyes never leaving the scene. Riley could feel the weight of the moment, but it was a weight born out of pride, not fear. They had saved her. Together, the sun rose the next morning, casting a soft, golden light over the rescue site. Riley sat on the edge of a log, his back sore, his eyes heavy with exhaustion, but he couldn't bring himself to look away from the hospital where Emma was being treated. The sky was clear now, and the cold had receded. It felt like the world had softened in the aftermath of the storm. Max sat at his feet, his tail thumping softly against the ground, as if waiting for Riley to say something. But Riley couldn't find the words. What could he say? What could he do now but let the quiet settle around them? Emma was safe. Her family had her back. The world had righted itself, if only for a moment, and Riley that the bond he shared with Max was deeper than any words could express. Together, they had saved a life, and that was enough. As he stood, ready to leave, he glanced up at the sky once more, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "You did good, Max." The dog's ears flicked as if he heard the unspoken words, and he wagged his tail once more. They walked back toward the car, the world no longer quite so dark. Riley felt a weight lift from his shoulders as they drove away. Emma was safe, and that was all that mattered. The ride back from the woods was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound between Riley and Max. Riley's eyes wandered out the window, watching the landscape blur into shades of brown and green. It was a peaceful morning now, the kind of peaceful that felt like a balm after the storm. The weight that had pressed on his chest for hours seemed to lift with every mile they put behind them, but a part of him was still tethered to that forest, to Emma, to the moment she opened her eyes and looked at him for the first time, really looked. Max lay in the back seat, his body stretched out in the way only a dog who has worked hard can rest. His body was still, but his ears twitched occasionally, as if making sure they were still on course, as if ensuring that Riley was okay. Riley's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. He had never been one to bask in the glory of a job well done. He was a man of few words, even fewer smiles, but today felt different. He was exhausted, but there was an undeniable sense of pride welling up inside him. They had saved a life. They had made the impossible possible. The ride was long, but the comfort of having Emma back, of knowing she would go home to her family, filled the silence with a quiet kind of peace. They had done it. And sometimes that's all you could ask for. When they arrived back at the station, the atmosphere was different. The usual buzz of officers moving in and out, paperwork flying in every direction, had a sense of calm to it. But there was something else, something deeper, something that resonated with every person who had been part of the search. They knew, without saying a word, that they had just been part of something much larger than themselves. As Riley stepped out of his car, Max trotted alongside him, his tail wagging with a satisfied rhythm. The officers who had been part of the search team nodded at them, their eyes filled with respect and understanding. It wasn't often that a child was found alive in situations like this. Riley didn't say anything as he walked to the office. He didn't need to. His shoulders were a little straighter, his steps a little more assured. Max was always at his side, and Riley knew he would always be there to guide him when things got too dark, when the path ahead seemed uncertain. Max wasn't just a dog. He was his partner, and today his hero. Inside, Riley was met with the familiar faces of his colleagues. They clapped him on the back, offering smiles and congratulations, but Riley couldn't focus on them for long. His mind was elsewhere, back with Emma's parents, back in that clearing. He thought of the small, trembling girl who had trusted him to bring her home. Her face lingered in his thoughts, a mix of exhaustion and gratitude, a reminder of why he did what he did. One of the officers, Lieutenant Morris, approached him with a clipboard in hand. "Good work, Riley. You and Max. Well, you guys pulled through. It's not every day a search ends like that." Riley simply nodded, a small, fleeting smile crossing his lips. "Max did the real work," he said, glancing down at the German shepherd who was now lying at his feet, content to rest. Max's ears perked up at his name, and Riley's heart swelled. The dog was far from finished, still ready to answer the call if it came. But for now they could rest. The hours dragged by, each minute passing with a kind of rhythmic slowness that made Riley feel as if time itself was stretching to accommodate the weight of what had happened. When the news came in that Emma was safe at home, Riley couldn't stop the sigh of relief that escaped him. The family was whole again. They had a long road ahead, but they were together. As evening fell, Riley sat in his quiet apartment, Max stretched out beside him. The apartment was dark except for the soft glow of the lamp in the corner. Outside, the world was quiet, peaceful, like the calm after a storm. Riley reflected on everything that had happened, but mostly he thought about Emma's face, how it had looked when she finally realized she was safe, how her body had trembled against him, and how her parents had hugged her like she was the most precious thing in the world. That was what mattered most. In the end, it wasn't about the job or the hours spent searching. It was about the lives they touched, the families they brought back together. Max lifted his head and nudged Riley's hand with his nose, as if reminding him to take a moment for himself. Riley smiled, his fingers stroking the dog's fur. "Thanks, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. Max gave a soft whine, as though to say, "No problem. I'm always here." And Riley knew in that quiet moment that as long as he had Max by his side, he would always be ready for the next call, the next search, the next rescue. They were a team, and nothing in the world could break that bond. Outside, the stars began to twinkle in the deepening night sky. It felt as if the universe, too, was taking a breath. It had been a long, dark night, but they had made it through. The next day, Riley stood outside the station, Max by his side, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The world seemed so much brighter after the storm. The air was clear and crisp, the kind of day that made everything feel possible again. He let out a deep breath, the weight of the previous night finally lifting from his chest, but his heart still carried the weight of what they had all been through. Emma's family had sent a thank you card, one that spoke volumes despite its simplicity. The words inside, scribbled in a shaky hand, "Re-day you saved our daughter. We'll never forget what you did for us. Thank you for bringing her home." Riley ran a hand through his hair, trying to shake the lingering feeling of the woods, the fear and the cold that had gawed him during the search. But there was something else, something deeper, that stayed with him, the bond he shared with Max. That bond had guided them through the impossible. Without Max, there was no way Riley could have navigated the dark hours of that night. The dog had been his anchor, his intuition, his strength. And now, standing there in the soft morning light, Riley realized that Max had done more than just help him find Emma. Max had reminded him of the importance of what he did, of why he chose this line of work. He glanced down at Max, who was sitting quietly at his feet, looking up at him with those deep, knowing eyes. The dog's ears twitched, and his tail swished slowly on the ground. Riley crouched down, meeting Max at eye level. "You're something else, you know that," he murmured, his voice thick with affection. Max didn't answer, of course, but his eyes said everything. In that moment, Riley knew that their partnership went beyond the badge, beyond the work they did. It was a partnership forged in the most raw and real of moments. They had saved a life together, and nothing could erase that bond. As Riley stood up, the rest of the team began filing out of the station, ready to take on whatever the day brought. They were still talking about the rescue, still amazed at how everything had come together in the end, but Riley didn't join in the conversation. He didn't need to. He had already lived it. Max looked up at him, and Riley knew what the dog was thinking. "Are we done for today?" Riley smiled, ruffling Max's fur. "Yeah, buddy, we're done for now." But the world never stayed quiet for long. Even as Riley turned back toward his patrol car, a call came through. His radio crackled, the voice of dispatch cutting through the calm. "Riley, we've got a new situation. Another missing child in the woods." Riley's heart skipped a beat, his pulse quickening. He looked down at Max, who immediately stood, ready for whatever came next. The weight of the last rescue had not dulled their sense of duty. It never would. Riley grabbed his jacket, slipping it on with one fluid motion. Max was already at his side, eager to get moving. "Let's go, buddy," Riley said, the words feeling like a promise. Together, they headed back into the unknown, the quiet between them filled with the knowledge that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as they always did. Together. The car ride to the new location was filled with the familiar sounds of tires on the road and the low hum of the engine. The weight of what had just transpired. The long night, the rescue, still pressed on Riley's chest, but it was different now. It was a weight that felt earned, a weight he could bear. Max, ever the loyal partner, lay quietly in the back seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, ready for whatever the day brought. Riley's mind drifted back to Emma's face, the way she had looked when he found her. Her wide, terrified eyes, but then the flicker of recognition when she realized she was safe. That moment would stay with him forever, like a photograph burned into his memory. But as much as that memory comforted him, he knew the work was never really over. The radio crackled again, pulling Riley from his thoughts. "Riley, we're getting reports of the child's last known location. The woods near the river. Please proceed with caution." Riley nodded, though he knew the dispatcher couldn't see him. "Copy that," he muttered, his voice steady despite the unease rising in his chest. Max shifted, as if he knew the urgency of the moment. Riley glanced at the rearview mirror, catching sight of the dog's golden, brown eyes meeting his. It was an unspoken promise, one that had been forged in the heat of battle, in the quiet moments of doubt and fear. Max was more than just a dog. He was family, a partner, and together they were unstoppable. The woods near the river were dense, even more so than where they had found Emma. The trees here were ancient, their trunks twisted and gnarled, the underbrush thick with brambles. The air was thick with moisture, the smell of damp earth heavy in the air. Riley's instincts kicked in as he parked the car, the familiar tension settling into his bones. The child had been reported missing hours ago, and the situation felt eerily similar to the night before. As Riley grabbed his gear, he felt the familiar weight of his canine leash in his hands. Max stood by his side, alert, his body coiled like a spring, ready to move at a moment's notice. Riley took a deep breath and nodded toward the woods. "Let's find this one faster than last time," he said, though he knew that was easier said than done. This time, the woods felt different. The air seemed colder, the shadows longer, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Riley's eyes scanned the perimeter, every muscle in his body alert. He had learned to trust the quiet in moments like these, the silence that preceded the discovery, the stillness that meant something was close. Max's nose twitched, his ears flicking back as he moved forward, his movements fluid, sure. Riley followed at a steady pace, his eyes flicking from one shadow to the next. The weight of the previous rescue hadn't left him. It was still with him, a shadow that followed them as they moved deeper into the woods. But he had learned something in the last 24 hours. Hope wasn't a luxury. It was a necessity, And so Riley held on to that hope, even as the path grew rougher, even as the hours dragged on. Max stopped suddenly, his body stiffening. Riley felt his breath catch in his throat. Max had found something that made the forest hold its breath. Riley moved forward quickly, his heart pounding in his chest, his thoughts scattered. Through the trees, he saw a flash of something, a bright red jacket, small shoes barely visible in the undergrowth. The child, Riley's legs carried him forward without thinking. His arms reached out, grabbing the little girl, her small body trembling in his arms. She was cold, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear, but she was alive. The relief that surged through Riley felt like a wave, washing over him, erasing a weight of the fear that had held him hostage since the moment they set out. "It's okay. You're safe now," he whispered, his voice shaking despite himself. He could feel Max beside him, his presence a steady reminder that they had done it again, that they had brought someone home. Riley glanced down at the child, her face wet with tears. But she was breathing. She was warm. She was alive. That was all that mattered. Max nudged the child gently, as if to say, "It's okay. You're going to be okay now." Riley couldn't stop the smile that tugged at his lips. He looked down at Max, then back at the child. "You're going to be all right?" he said softly. More to himself than to anyone else, the rescue team arrived within minutes, their headlights cutting through the trees like a beacon. They worked quickly, assessing the child's condition, wrapping her in blankets, offering her water. Riley stood back, his arms crossed as Max sat at his side, his eyes never leaving the child. There was a calmness to Max now, as if the dog knew this was his part of the job, watching over those they had saved, offering comfort in the quiet moments after the storm. As the child was taken to safety, Riley felt the familiar bittersweet emptiness settle over him. This part of the job, this part was never easy. You saved them, you brought them home, but there was always the uncertainty. There was always the thought that somewhere there might be another one waiting, another family in the woods, another life hanging in the balance. But for now, Riley knew they had done it. They had found her. And that would be enough. The drive back was quieter this time, no urgency, no panic, just the steady hum of the road beneath them. Max lay in the back seat again, his body relaxed, his head resting on his paws. Riley's grip on the wheel was loose now, his fingers numb from the tension of the day. The night had passed, and they had done their job. The child was safe, the family would heal. And Riley, he would keep moving forward. When they arrived back at the station, the weight of the world didn't feel as heavy. Max is by his side, as always, a constant reminder that they were a team. The world may be dark at times, but there was light in the work they did. They were the ones who brought people back from the edge, the ones who saved lives, even when the odds were stacked against them. As Riley walked through the doors of the station, he paused for a moment, looking out into the parking lot. The stars were fading in the sky, replaced by the soft light of dawn. He had no words for the way he felt, no way to explain the quiet satisfaction that settled in his chest. But there was one thing he knew for sure. The road ahead would be long, but with Max by his side, there was nothing they couldn't face. As the first rays of dawn began to stretch across the sky, painting everything in hues of gold and orange, Riley and Max stood together, side by side, watching the world wake up. The quiet was different now. It wasn't the silence of the unknown, but the peace that came after a job well done. The weight of the night's events had faded, replaced by a deep, steady calm. Riley glanced down at Max, who was sitting at his feet, his tail gently swaying back and forth. There was no need for words between them. They both understood. They had done something that mattered. They had saved 2 lives that night, and in doing so, had reminded themselves why they kept going, even when the world felt heavy and uncertain. In that moment, Riley knew that their work was never about the accolades or recognition. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about the quiet, unspoken moments, the moments when a life was saved, a family healed, and hope restored in the midst of chaos. The sun continued to rise, casting its warmth over everything, and Riley felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the journey he had chosen. There would always be another call, another search, another life to save. But for now, there was peace. With Max by his side, Riley knew they could face anything that came their way. Together, they were unstoppable. And as they turned to walk back into the station, Riley's heart was full, not with the weight of the past, but with the promise of the future, one life saved at a time.